The story begins with our main protagonist, called Bojji, who was born deaf and couldn't speak. He was so weak that he couldn't even swing his sword, and was despised by his own people, even though he was the rightful first prince, unlike his brother, called Data, who has a strong physique. As the first child, Bojji fought hard to inherit his father's throne and to become the greatest king in the world. However, his people doubted him because he was so weak. The story focuses on a place called Bojji Kingdom, led by a king called Bojji. Bojji was one of the strongest kings in his era, who managed to rank 7th among the strongest kings. Unfortunately, King Bojji began to fall ill in his old age, and it was said that his life would end soon. So, the king of Bojji is required to immediately appoint which prince will be the heir to the royal throne. King Bojji has 2 sons, Bojji and Data. Bojji is the son of his first wife, who had died, while Data is the son of his second wife, called Hilling. Bojji and Data are very different in terms of physique and strength. Bojji has a small and short body with weak physical strength, while Data has a tall body and stronger physical strength. Bojji has been mute since birth as he is unable to speak and has been deaf his entire life. Many people in the Bojji kingdom do not want Bojji to be the heir to the throne, as they believe he is useless and weak, so they would prefer Data to replace his father on the throne instead. One day, when Bojji was playing on the hill, he met a shadowy figure who could talk, called Cage. Cage approached Bojji to rob his belongings, and we discover that he is part of a shadow clan, who are fiercely loyal to the master they have chosen. However, several years ago, the Shadow Clan was accused of treason, so the entire clan was captured and killed, but Cage is the only one left that still survives today. After Bojji gave all his clothes and belongings to Cage, he immediately left and returned to the kingdom. Cage was surprised he casually gave all his belongings away without second thought. When Bojji returned, he was harshly insulted by the residents passing by along the way to the palace, because the citizens knew that Bojji could not speak or hear. King Bojji, who was aware that Bojji was often underestimated by all the kingdom, had tried to make Bojji appear more authoritative by providing sword training to Bojji with one of the royal sword trainers, called Damaz. However, due to Bojji's small body and weak physical strength, he still cannot compare to the strength of his brother Data, and always loses when he fights one-on-one with him. Data has a great fighting ability. Even Damaz, Bojji's sword trainer, is amazed by his fighting skills. After fighting Data, Bojji was badly injured and suffered injuries to his legs and arms. Cage, who always secretly followed Bojji, tried to comfort him when he was crying in his room. Bojji felt very sad because his body was so weak, and he was always losing against Data. Since then, the friendship between Bojji and Cage has grown stronger. A few days later, King Bojji was declared dead, and the royal advisors began to announce the contents of the will written by King Bojji, where it's revealed that he decided to choose Bojji as the successor to the royal throne. After hearing the will, Data was shocked and could not believe that his father preferred Bojji over him. A very disappointed Data protested against the magic mirror that was given to him by the king as a gift. The magic mirror, which was able to talk, spoke to Data and told him that he need not to worry, because in the end, the kingdom would still choose him as the next heir to the throne. The magic mirror's prediction came true, and Data was selected as the king of the Bojji kingdom, as Hilling and all the royal commanders had revoted to choose Data and replace Bojji. Bojji felt very sad and disappointed with the decision. A few days later, Bibin, who is Data's sword trainer, informs Bojji that Cage has gone to wander in the wild. Realizing that his best friend has disappeared, Bojji decides to go searching for Cage. Although initially, Bojji's plan was opposed by Hilling, but he was finally allowed to go to the outside world with 2 bodyguards, Damaz and Hokuro. When Hilling lets go of Bojji, she secretly worries about him and feels that something bad might happen. Deep inside her heart, Hilling cares for Bojji, but ever since her real son, Data, was born, she had naturally become more fond of him. On the other hand, Data struggled to get a high rank in the assessment of the new king's rankings. After being tested by the judges, Data only got a rank of 90. Data often dreamed that his older brother would take the throne from him again. However, as suggested by the magic mirror, Data decided to take power from his father's dead body. Meanwhile, Bojji, who has been on a long journey in the wild world, arrives at a hot crater called the Gates of Hell. Damaz invites Bojji to take a closer look at the Gates of Hell, but it turns out that it was only part of Damaz's plan to kill Bojji by pushing him into the crater. Previously, Damaz was ordered by Data to kill Bojji. Knowing that, Hokuro felt very angry and immediately fought against Damaz. As a result of the fight, one of Damaz's hands was cut off. On the other hand, Bojji managed to survive. He was protected by Cage, who had been hiding in Bojji's bag, and we discover that it was Bibin who had sent Cage to protect Bojji during his journey. He advised Cage to take bojji and find someone who could train him to become stronger. Cage asks bojji to come with him to the underworld through a secret path at the gates of hell. As bojji and Cage were on their journey, a mysterious smoke suddenly appears and makes them fall unconscious. Several troops from the underworld kingdom then bring them to the underworld royal palace. Elsewhere, Data begins to perform a ritual to extract power from King Bossi's frozen corpse. His corpse was extracted to produce a magic potion that could make Data strong like King Bossi. However, at the last moment, Data felt doubtful again and chose to throw the potion away. When Data was about to get out of the dungeon, the commander, called Appias, appeared and tries to kill Data. Appias is one of the royal officials who is very loyal to King Bossi and bojji. However, Appias' efforts are prevented by the magic mirror, which is revealed to be the incarnation of a woman called Miranjo. Miranjo was a close confidant of King Bossi and had made Appias have great fighting power. Because Appias had already sworn allegiance to Miranjo, he had no other choice but to obey her wishes. He then makes Data fall unconscious and forces him to drink King Bossi's potion. It turns out the potion does not work to make him strong like King Bossi, but instead functions to revive his soul. And now King Bossi is back, taking over Data's body and using it as a shell for his soul. Meanwhile, Bojji and Cage had awakened from their blackout and have been brought before King Dessa, who is exceptionally powerful and ranked second of all the kings. As King Dessa knows Bojji is the son of King Bossi, he was interested in finding out Bojji's strength and fighting ability. Bojji was then asked to fight one of King Dessa's commanders. He showed his speed by dodging every attack made by the soldier commander. Unfortunately, King Dessa was not impressed by Bojji's evasive ability, so he expelled Bojji and Cage from his kingdom. Before they left the palace, the commander told Cage that the person who was actually able to train Bojji was the younger brother of King Dessa, called Despa. Bojji and Cage get excited and immediately went to meet with Despa. When they arrived at Despa's house, Cage immediately asked him to train with Bojji. However, before that, Despa asked Bojji for a large amount of money before accepting him as his student. After Despa received a chest box filled with gold jewelry, he accepted Bojji as his disciple. At first, Despa says that Bojji doesn't have enough physical strength, so no matter how hard he practices, he would never improve. But Despa will not give up on him and looks for the right method to find his expertise. For weeks, Bojji underwent intensive training with Despa. The training results began to show when Cage saw Bojji was easily able to destroy a large stone. We then get to see why Bojji has such a small and weak body. Bojji is small and short with little to no physical strength because of an agreement made between King Bossi and a demon. King Bossi and Miranjo, who want to have extraordinary power, had to sacrifice something to grant their request by the demon. In addition to the age and life of King Bossi, the demon told him to have a child so that he could receive the power of it. On the other hand, Hilling, who received the news that Damaz had killed Bojji, was very sad and angry. Hilling then decided to sentence Damaz and Hokuro to death. But before the execution was carried out, King Bossi appeared and stopped them. King Bossi said that Bojji was currently alive and training somewhere. Then, Damaz and Hokuro were released from the death penalty and only expelled from the kingdom. After Hilling realized the person she saw in front of her was not Data, but the king of Bossi, she began to ask about Data's whereabouts. King Bossi ruthlessly replied that Data had disappeared, which made Hilling so shocked she fainted. Miranjo asked King Bossi for permission to go to the underworld that night. Miranjo wants to gather more troops to increase King Bossi's power. The next day when Hilling was awake, she came to King Bossi and asked him to return Data. Suddenly, Hilling heard the voice of Data, who was currently trapped in King Bossi's chest. When Hilling was about to cleave King Bossi's chest, the head guard stopped her, as he is loyal to King Bossi. Elsewhere, Bojji had finished his training with Despa, and Bojji is ready to face his enemies. Cage initially doubted Bojji's ability because his sword was very small. However, Despa explained that in addition to Bojji's ability to evade his opponent's attacks, he can defeat his enemies by attacking the weak points of each opponent. Bojji and Cage thanked Despa for all the knowledge and training he gave. Cage then invites Bojji to return to the palace and resolve the conflict. But Bojji had doubts about going back, as he was still traumatized by the assassination attempt on him ordered by Damaz. Bojji thought that it was Hilling's orders. However, after Bojji reminisced about when Hilling loved him as a child, he was finally willing to return to the palace. On the other hand, King Dessa realized that his youngest brother, called Auken, had escaped from the underworld prison. King Dessa deliberately had his brother locked up because he had made a pact with a demon to become immortal. After King Dessa found out that Auken was going to Bossi's kingdom, he decided to go with his troops to the palace and establish dominion over Bossi's kingdom. After Auken and some prisoners from the underworld had arrived at Bossi's palace, they then captured King Bossi and locked him up in a dungeon. The prisoners of the underworld now control the royal palace of Bossi. Meanwhile, Bojji and Cage, who'd been received by the underworld warriors from King Dessa, went straight to Bossi's royal palace. However, Bojji doesn't realize that the underworld warrior has a plan to take over the Bossi kingdom. On the way to the palace, Bojji and the underground soldiers were stopped by Auken. Auken accidentally found himself in the middle of the city to slaughter the townsmen. The underworld warrior commander, who remembers Despa's message regarding the warning not to let Bojji fight Auken, immediately asks Bojji to go first to Bossi's palace and protect Queen Hilling. When Bojji arrived at the palace, he saw the two-headed snake that had always accompanied him being beaten by a giant called Gigan. Bojji incapacitates Gigan, showing great strength, and asks Hilling to heal his beloved snake. Hilling was surprised to see Bojji's strength, before revealing that she had run out of healing potions. Luckily, Cage had a spare few bottles of potions, with which to make more healing potions. While Hilling was trying to heal the snake and several injured dogs, Bojji fought back and defeated Gigan, who had arisen from his state of unconsciousness. The dogs that had previously been the companions of the prisoners of the underworld eventually became Bojji's companions. Even Gigan, who had just been defeated by Bojji, became obedient and swore allegiance to him. After that, the two-headed snake told Bojji to immediately go to the dungeon to prevent the underworld forces from entering Bossi's palace. On the other hand, Auken, who was fighting the underworld warrior commander with his army, was suddenly struck by lightning. The lightning was magic sent by King Dessa to defeat Auken. Despair, who saw Auken collapse, immediately tied him up with the rope he had prepared. Meanwhile, King Dessa and the rest of the underworld army had already arrived at Bossi's palace through the underground gate. At the same time, Bojji and Gigan had arrived at the dungeon. King Dessa told Bojji that he wants to catch Miranjo, who had released the underworld lords and brought them to Bossi's palace. King Dessa then reveals that Miranjo was the mastermind behind all this chaos. Gigan, who did not want to return to the prison of the underworld, directly attacks King Dessa. When King Dessa was about to counterattack, Bojji quickly prevented him. Suddenly, King Dessa got a telepathic message from Despa, saying that he would not win against Bojji. Despa suggested that King Dessa retreat and let Bojji fight the king of Bossi, so that when Miranjo is alone, Dessa can defeat Miranjo and the cursed demon who is with him. After hearing the explanation, King Dessa agreed and immediately promised Gigan a position as a warrior of the underworld kingdom, if Gigan was willing to return to the underworld palace with him. After receiving Bojji's blessing, Gigan accepted the offer, and King Dessa along with the underworld army returned to their kingdom. On the other hand, Miranjo has now been captured by the prisoners of the underworld. She begins to send messages to Auken through telepathy, asking him to save her. After receiving the message from Miranjo, Auken quickly untied the rope around his body and ran towards the palace. When Auken arrived, he coincidentally ran into Bojji and Cage. He intends to kill Bojji, therefore, the battle between Bojji and Auken is unavoidable. Even though Bojji had stabbed Auken many times, Auken still survived and was not even injured. Bojji, who realizes that Auken was an immortal, had no other choice but to continue attacking him. Even the commander of the underworld army and Despa couldn't defeat Auken. After seeing Bojji almost being killed by Auken, Cage turned into a giant shadow and swallowed Auken. However, Auken revives by piercing Cage's body with his sword. As a result, Cage died instantly. Auken then kills Bojji, who is already in a weak condition, with multiple stab wounds. We then get to the moment when King Bossi was in prison, talking about his past with Miranjo. Data, still trapped in King Bossi's heart, witnesses the memory. Miranjo was once a child who came from a place called Hamura, the land of magicians. The residents of Hamura were the first humans who dared to oppose the power of the gods. Bossi, who was wandering the country and was helped by Miranjo's mother, helped the people of Hamura vanquish the cruelty of the gods. At first, all went well, but some of Hamura's residents made an alliance with the gods to fight the citizens of their own land. The treacherous alliance then killed Miranjo's mother and tortured Miranjo inhumanely. They cut off both of Miranjo's hands and skinned her face. Bossi, who knew this, was very angry and immediately killed all the traitors. Bossi then goes with Miranjo to leave the country, and Bossi slowly begins to fall in love with Miranjo. They then met a demon and asked it to make Bossi the strongest human in the world. The demon granted Bossi's request, at the expense of his age and the strength of his first child. Miranjo, who realized that Bossi's life was coming to an end, made a plan so that she could resurrect Bossi after his death later. Miranjo deliberately makes Bossi marry Hilling and have a child, which was Data. From the very beginning, Miranjo had prepared Data to be the body for the soul of King Bossi. After seeing the past, Data is furious with his father, but feels bad for Miranjo. Data then promised Miranjo that he would replace King Bojji to protect her, as Data wholeheartedly believed Miranjo was a good person. Data's assessment proved correct. After Miranjo saw Bojji had been killed by Alkan, she immediately left the mirror and entered the body of a soldier. She approaches the bodies of Bojji and Cage to heal them. As Miranjo heals them, Despa can see glimpses of Miranjo's sad past. Despa then told the memory to Bojji and asked that he takes the appropriate action to solve this problem. A few moments later, Bojji and Cage came back to life due to the healing of Miranjo earlier. When Bojji rises again to fight Alkan, King Bojji suddenly appears and heals everyone with the healing power of Data. King Bojji then advanced toward Alkan and prepared to fight him. The power of Alkan's sword was unable to match the power of King Bojji, who retaliated by destroying Alkan with the power of his mace. However, Alkan can still rise again because he is an immortal. King Bojji then had the idea of crushing Alkan's body into a ball of flakes and burying the body fragments into a very large boulder, so Alkan won't be able to regenerate his body anymore. After that, King Bojji came to meet Miranjo, who was in the magic mirror, and apologizes for making her suffer tremendously in the past. King Bojji, who still loves Miranjo very much, says that he would go with her to the afterlife if he died in the last battle. It seems that King Bojji doesn't know that Miranjo's soul can't go to the afterlife, because she has violated the agreement with the devil by resurrecting King Bojji again. After that, King Bojji told everyone in the palace that he would kill anyone who tried to take Data's body and bring him back to life. Bojji, who still loves Data, chooses to go forward and face King Bojji. The other dignitaries, Damaz, Bibin, Dorsh, and Apias, support Bojji. When Damaz was about to attack King Bojji, Bojji suddenly stopped him. Despa explains that currently, King Bojji is in Data's body, so the only person who can fight him without killing Data is Bojji. The epic battle between Bojji and King Bojji finally begins. At first, Bojji could only dodge King Bojji's attacks while trying to find his weak points. After a while, Bojji finally discovered King Bojji's weakness. He destroys the mace held by King Bojji and attacks his weak point. Within seconds, he was directly knocked to the ground. He then crawled over to Miranjo to destroy her, so he could return Data to his original body. However, the attempt was prevented by Bojji, as he thought it could harm Miranjo. Miranjo, who saw the sadness in Bojji's face, chose to yield and ask Bojji to destroy her magic mirror. Thus, Data can regain control of his body. After Bojji destroys the magic mirror, King Bojji's soul and Miranjo's soul fly up. The giant red devil who had made a pact with them suddenly appears and flies into the sky to eat Miranjo's soul. Miranjo apologizes to King Bojji because she can't go to the afterlife with him. A few seconds later, the red demon was struck by a thunderbolt sent by King Dessa. The commander of the underworld army immediately decapitated the red demon before it could recover. Despa then made an offer with the red demon. He would return the red demon's head if the demon was willing to grant one wish. When Despa was about to say his request, Data suddenly appeared and said his request first. Data wants the demon to bring Miranjo back to life. The red devil immediately granted Data's request, and in turn, Data has now fulfilled his promise to protect Miranjo. Seeing the presence of Miranjo, who was able to live again, made Despa happy, so he gave up his request to be taken by Data. An overjoyed Hilling, who saw her two beloved children survive, hugged them both. In the end, everyone in the palace forgives Miranjo's previous actions, and she promises that she will change herself into a better person. After that, Data knelt before Bojji and handed over the royal throne to him. From that day on, Bojji received the title of king in the Bojji kingdom, and everyone was happy to welcome their new king. Cage, who felt that his task had been completed, decided to leave Bojji and Bojji's palace. The next day, when the inauguration for the new king took place, Bojji realizes that Cage had disappeared. A confused Bojji tried to find Cage throughout the palace, but his search was unsuccessful. Even though Bojji has become a king who is loved by his people and carries out his duties fairly, he still feels that something is missing. Hilling realized this and tells Bojji that he no longer needed to hold back, and was allowed to seek freedom with Cage. Hilling always thought that Cage was a true friend who made Bojji happy and shine brightly. Hearing this, Bojji decides to return the title of king to Data, and goes on a quest to find Cage. After several days of traveling, Bojji was finally able to meet Cage again. He was so happy that he burst into tears. Although initially, Cage was angry at Bojji for giving up his position as king. However, Bojji informs Cage that he will wander and build an empire of his own one day. And this brings the anime to an end. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on another video. Until next time, take care.